Season 2, Episode 21, Taghreed Al-Saraj, Language Anxiety.
This is the Actual Fluency Podcast, helping you become a better language learner by providing motivating weekly inspiration, as well as top tips and tricks from expert guests. And now, your host, Chris Broholm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. On this week, I'm joined once again by Taghreed Al-Saraj. Taghreed was the guest 2 episodes ago when we were talking about language anxiety. And sadly, due to technical problems, a part of our conversation was lost, and we redid it, and this is the final product. And I'm really grateful that Taghreed had time to come and redo it with such a short notice. I know she's got a lot going on, very busy. So this is a really cool, and I think we did a really good job of recovering what was lost from the universe of technical problems. One thing I do want to note is that, Skype is getting worse and worse for me. I don't know if anyone else is having the same problem, but this time the audio quality was pretty low on both sides, as if the bandwidth was simply limited in some cases, which is completely ridiculous when you consider I have really super fast internet and I'm not using Wi-Fi or anything. So you will hear slightly worse audio quality than usual, but I hope that you'll find it acceptable. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, praise, you can send an email to chris@actualfluency.com, and that's CHRIS for the time being, and that will redirect to my email. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. All right, everyone, we're back with another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast, and as promised, I brought back Taghreed to redo the original interview where we talked about her story and the book, The Anxious Language Learner, A Saudi Woman's Story. Hey Taghreed, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come and redo it after my technical problems last week.
Oh, no, that's fine. Hopefully this time is going to be really good.
Fingers crossed. We've got a few fail-safes running this time, so 100% sure it's going to work this time. But before we get into your book, The Anxious Language Learner, why don't you give people a little backstory on how you came to the point of researching language anxiety and learning foreign languages?
The whole process started after I finished my master's in education in TESOL, teaching English as a second language, and I started lecturing at the university in Saudi Arabia. And when I was in class, I saw that the students were having difficulties and they were not having fun learning English. That was the language that I was teaching them at the time. And so I was wondering what was going on, and I first originally thought it was just they didn't have enough motivation. It wasn't there, and they thought that they had to learn the language, so there was no, motivation to continue learning, so they were just really barely memorizing, dragging themselves to class. And sometimes I thought it was me, my methods that I'm using that was not that appealing to them. I tried to be very creative in finding ways to lure them in, to give them projects that was interesting about travel around the world. I was trying to be creative as much as possible, but I was still not getting through the whole class. And at the time I wanted to, in academia, a PhD is like a must. And so I always wanted to have to do my PhD. So I started reading about motivation and seeing, because it was clearly in my mind it was motivation that they're lacking. And as further into my reading, I found out there's something called anxiety. And I thought, that could be a possibility because it's all individual differences. So it could be motivation, it could be a little bit of anxiety. And so when I really took it seriously and I took time off and I went to London to do my PhD at the University of London, it was only then when I started reading more and more about motivation and then a little bit about anxiety that I started steering away. And I thought, the problems they had was not motivation. it sounded like more of anxiety. So I started out first researching motivation, then I ended up into anxiety, because the more the signs that I was seeing and all the behavioral effects was more into anxiety, not motivation. And that's how I really started deviating from motivation and ended up into anxiety. And, it was just an eye opener. I never thought that anxiety would have such a big effect on students. And all this time I thought it was just they weren't motivated enough.
Right. But you could look back and then see, it kind of makes sense when you when you got to that point.
It was an eye opener, and it was really that first year of research, and the more reading and the extensive reading that I had to do, it was all like starting to a complete shift of research proposal. Like I started a proposal on motivation and trying to figure out, how to lure these students into enjoying the language and all this. And then at the end of that first year, motivation wasn't even barely included. It was all anxiety in it, and it was my supervisor was like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "But all the signs doesn't stick to motivation. It's more of the anxiety." And it was interesting to see that the anxiety could affect the students so much into deterring them from learning and not coming into class and all these behavior that is associated with it.
Right. Yeah, it's quite fascinating. I don't think it gets a lot of airtime either on the various blogs and in the various language learning books. It seems that it's a topic that it's not frequently talked about, unless it's together with maybe shyness. People will sometimes talk about, oh, I'm really shy. I have trouble going out and practicing the new language.
Yeah, and you know what's the funny part? The shy people are the most anxious people.
Right.
And so shyness is one of the criteria for being anxious.
Right.
So then when we say shyness, in reality is that those people or those students are actually very anxious. That's why they are shy.
Right. Now
it all comes together, and so that's how I knew that. Oh, okay, I was thinking of something else, but shyness, all these things, the behavioral things, they're all cause and effect of anxiety.
Right. And in our previous talk, which was season 2, episode 19, we discussed how we could make it better in the classroom as an individual student, how to reduce that anxiety a little bit if possible, or maybe you just be aware that it exists. That's a good first step. So if people want to, listen more to the practical sides of the matter, then that part of the conversation was saved and up on there. So
yeah, because if you know what you're going through, you can tackle it.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, it goes undetected, and they don't know what it is. They just say, "Oh, I'm not a good language learner," and that's the deterrent right there, and then they stop learning, or they're not going to be interested in even thinking about learning a new language. But if you already know that, these are some of the effects of what anxiety has on you, but you know what, don't be deterred by it, because there's other ways of going around it, reducing it. So, I always say it's like, if you know the cause of the problem, you can tackle it. It's the same as a doctor. When you go, he knows what it is. He can figure out or narrow it down. He can give you the medication for it, and you can get better.
Yeah, and just knowing is also a great way in and of itself to start improving. If you know you have that weakness or problem. But
yeah. And then you just figure out how to go around it, or a lot of people don't know that they have anxiety, and then they become so much of an expert into camouflaging it. And so, like you'd see students in class that they're shy. Let's take the example that we said, that they're shy, that they don't raise their hands, they don't want to participate, and it's all because of their anxiety, that they don't want to be, they don't want to say something that it could be wrong and people would laugh at them, or being looked down upon, that they're not good enough in the class. or they're comparing themselves with other students. All of these things come up. And so what they do is like they come up with a way, it's like, oh, when the teacher asks a question, they always find a way like, oh, fidget or do something or have no eye contact with the teacher so they don't have to be called upon. And so we are very smart individuals that we figure out a way to camouflage our flaws. And this is in everyday life. It's not only in the language learning. But we are smart. We figure out, we know what we have a problem, but we just maybe don't know what it is. But we can always figure out a way of how to go around it or camouflage it and not be so obvious about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's also a way of protecting the ego a little bit. You don't want to seem weak in front of others.
And you want to save face. You don't want anybody, there's also comparison. People compare themselves with others, and it's like competition. And it shouldn't be that way. But people think, oh, they're better than me in class. Like, I'm not that great, but they are better. Or I want to be, or I beat them. I got a better grade than them. So the competition in class is also another thing that I try not to play on, and I always like to reduce that competition because it doesn't benefit anybody. And you're so the class becomes as a field of competitiveness of who's better than who, which is it's the whole process of learning a new language should be cooperative. Like, you help me and I help you, in a way that we don't have to be against each other. We could help each other, hold hands, and it's like a family atmosphere.
Yes.
So it's like your second family. The class, it would be your second family.
It's like a team effort of learning languages.
Exactly.
Instead of...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is it's exactly when you're in class, it's not an individual thing. Remember, it's the teacher's effort that comes into play. It's your effort as an individual and your classmates. So if you have a class that is all cooperating together and helping each other, you miss something, they go, oh, remember we did this. They out of class, maybe they help you in something that you didn't understand. Instead of being always competitive in the classroom, then there's no cooperation. Who wants to be in that kind of class? I mean, I'm not only thinking of language class, even in any other class. If you were always like that, sitting in class and competing against each other, I would be dreading going into that class. And I'm like, oh, here we go again. So there's no motivation to go into that class.
Right.
But if we're having like a family thing, it's like, oh, we're going to enjoy ourselves and laugh within this classroom, and we're going to do a lot of activities that are fun. Then you'd have that motivation factor. And again, anxiety, motivation are always hand in hand. You have to have that kind of motivation in order to continue learning that language.
Yeah, exactly. But let's switch the perspective a little bit to your book, The Anxious Language Learner, A Saudi Woman's Story. And first, let me ask you, what made you decide to write a book about the anxiety you found in your research?
This was like a funny story, and it started off when I was at the University of London doing research. I spoke to one of my colleagues and I said, you know what? I've always, do research and I always do interviews with students and I hear what they say about anxiety. But you know what? I've never experienced it because I learned English at a very young age. And so I didn't have this anxiety. And so, but they keep telling me these are the symptoms, these are the signs, and this is what's, the deterrent, and this is what I feel like. But I never experienced this. So I just wanted to feel what they go through. And so in order, when you report on something, when you've actually experienced it, it becomes more true. It becomes more, you feel it more instead of just reporting as this is what they said, this is what, majority of the students would say. I didn't have any experience in it. So I told him, like, I'm thinking about doing another language and I want to report my experience in that language. And then he says, oh, that sounds great, and then he says, so what language do you think you want to do? And I'm like, I'm going to do Turkish. And he says, like, so why Turkish? And I said, you know what? Turkey is becoming a big player in not only the economy but in the Middle East. I mean, Turkish soap opera, and you're gonna laugh. Yes, Turkish soap opera is taking the Middle East by storm.
Wow.
They are translating it, dubbing it, and so everybody, when I was going out with my friends for coffee, whatever, the whole conversation would be, did you see this so far? Did you see that? And this is what happened. And I'm like sitting there in between, like I got no time to watch TV, and they're talking about Turkish soap opera, what's happening here and there, and I'm like, so how do you even watch these Turkish soap opera? And they go, oh, it's already dubbed, so in Arabic, so we watch it. And that interested me, and I was like, okay, so it's dubbed in Arabic. So I took time off once, and I went to the websites, and I watched one episode. And that one episode, I was like, it triggered me, like, this is interesting. And I saw a couple of things in that episode that was very closely related to the Arabic culture. And so I said to me, it would benefit me not looking at watching it dubbed. Why don't I just take it as actually listening to it and have it translated, so subtitled, so I can actually understand what they're saying. But I want to hear the language. I want to hear the intonation of the language instead of dubbing. So I watched another episode, and the things that I heard in the language was very interesting because I saw a lot of similarities between the words in Turkish and Arabic words. And so I thought, wow, this is interesting. So when my colleague at the University of London said, which language? I said Turkish, and he said to me, why? And I said, well, Turkish soap operas are like hitting the Middle East like by storm. And he started laughing, and I started laughing, and I'm like, yeah, can you believe that? It's the Turkish soap opera that's going to be pushing me to learn Turkish. But wouldn't that be interesting? And in the book, I talk about why Turkish, and in more details, and I say, why, what's the motivation for me to continue learning the language? Because you always have to find your motivation as well. And that itself is a very interesting and funny as well story. But I laughed at it at the beginning, but the more I went into it, I found it very interesting. I fell in love with the culture itself, and maybe more or less because it has a lot of influence with the Arabic culture. That's what kept me going.
Great. Yeah, I've heard many stories similar to that where people get into a language for, let's say, very whimsical decisions maybe, but once they're inside, it's wow, they really open up the doors and they get to see a whole nother world, which I guess is one of the greatest points about learning a new language, is that you get a pass to the culture as well.
But the funny part was that I'm a researcher and I'm actually doing this, and then the motivation was the soap operas, so the Turkish soap opera. So me and my colleague were laughing about it. It's like, this was the motivation for the research, and it was that I said, you always have to have, nobody can judge what motivation is good or bad as long as it makes you happy. And I thought, this is for research sake, let's just go and do it. And so it took me about a year and a half and continuing doing this between, I started in London, taking Turkish classes. Mind you, I have nobody that I know that is Turkish that I can even practice that language with. That was the worst part. It's like you chose a language that you got nobody around you that spoke it, that you could practice with, and then I knew, but that was the motivation, was the soap opera. So I wanted to, and I said, well, my objective and goal is that by the end of this, I would have a good body of research, enough information from whatever my students were telling me and what I was feeling while I was learning this language. And what I would understand when I'm watching these Turkish soap operas. So put it all together, and I would have this article. And I started as an article. I never thought that this would develop into a book. And I thought it was just only them. I'm going to see the experiences that I go through, put myself in my students' shoes, and see how they were feeling the anxiety. And as soon as I started writing, this was like never ending. This could be no way it could be an article. No more. It was going over 10,000 words easily. And plus, because I also had to put in my experiences and going back and reflecting on my upbringing, how I learned English and how I didn't feel that anxiety, but then how as an adult and as a researcher and I'm experienced in the field, how I was feeling the anxiety, and then connecting it with what the students were saying, but at the same time with lots of funny stories in order to keep the reader more interested. And at the same time, at the end of the book, I said, it's not enough just to tell the readers, here's the problem, we all go through this, but I have to tell them how to fix it. In research, we always say, this is the problem and this is what's happening. But we give recommendations of how to fix it, and the recommendations are very simple and short. But I did a whole chapter on just how to coach yourself at the end of the book, how to lower that anxiety, how to have expectations, what kind of targets that are achievable. So in order not to overwhelm yourself and then get lost and then say, oh, I can't do this anymore. And that's how it grew from this article and to this book now.
Fantastic. And you just talked about upbringing as well. And one thing that I really enjoyed about the book is that it has the first part is really about your backstory and how you got to the point where you are today. But also you included a lot of cultural information and about the difference between Saudi Arabia and the West, quote unquote, because you went to America and therefore you understand both worlds like that. But I really enjoyed that, and I guess my question is, when you were writing the book, before you started writing the book, did you know that you wanted to have that cultural, almost like a bonus package? Or did it just come to you as you were writing that I need to actually tell people a little bit about this so they'll understand?
Yeah, because I think that came up when it was an article. It wasn't needed at that much. But when I was writing the book, I thought, okay, so if I refer to something or if I recall from my memoirs, like how as I was growing up and how as I was learning, if I refer to something, it would mean something to me, but it wouldn't mean to you as a Western reader. You wouldn't understand why I said what I said. Mm-hmm. So in a way, I had to really dig deep and analyze everything. But when I was analyzing, I have to explain why. Why was I thinking that way? What was the mentality behind that? How is that culture? And language and culture go hand in hand. You cannot learn a language without picking up that culture as well. And so then, if I had to educate in some way and explain my culture or where I'm coming from, although I lived all over the world and I've had exposure to all different kinds of culture, I needed to explain the Arab culture and how the mentality was. And so when I was showing that, everything has to be in the Arab culture, like you say something, it has to be right, to save face. It's not like, you didn't do it right. It's okay. Nobody's going to take it against you. Just do it again and get better at it. In our culture, we take it more of serious. You have to be very, say something and you got to say it right, because then you'll lose face and people won't, respect you or regard you as an educated person. They're thinking you're mediocre. And so that culture is very different than, try again. If you don't succeed once, try again. Right. But that, it has to be done the first time right. And so coming from that culture, it's very difficult to learn another language because you got all this culture thing or how you were brought up, say everything right, don't do this, don't do that, to coming and making mistakes. And I adapted to both cultures. So I know which culture to say what and to do what. And so it's like I always say, if you have another language, you have another soul.
Right.
because you're functioning very different while using that language. So in Arabic would be a very calmed down, very well-spoken, soft-spoken, person is opposed to when in English you just say what's on your mind, and you're more free to say if you make a mistake, so what, you can fix it or change it, or so the mentality is very different in that way. And so learning a language is very difficult for somebody coming from the Arab world or even in the Asian culture, because they also have the same things as the restraints, let's say. They don't want to say anything until it's 100% right, which defeats the purpose of learning a new language, because you got to make mistakes.
Right.
Well, learning a language, you're not, if you remember your mother tongue, how did you learn that? Your parents taught you things, you made mistakes during the way, and then as you grew older, you became more proficient in that language and you performed better. And you're picking up another language. If you don't make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, you're never going to learn that language. You're just going to be quiet until one day, boom, everything comes to you. It just doesn't work that way.
Right.
So people feel, and the culture is one of the things that pulls people back, is that they're thinking, no, I have to do it this way and how I was raised and I was brought up. But in reality, that doesn't work, because you don't remember when you were 1 year old or 2 year old, unless you have a very good memory, how you learned that language. Even how to walk. You stood up, you fell, you got up again, you stood up, you fell, and you hit yourself, you hurt yourself. And that's the trial and error. That's what happens. And people always think that language is not like that, but it is. It's like learning how to walk again.
Yeah.
Learning how to talk again, and pronounce things like saying Baba or saying father, or it's like it doesn't come that easily. You'll do the ba, and then the Baba comes later. And so you're all this process is for a lot of people is like, no, I'm now too old to go back again and be a child again. But in reality, that is how we normally learn a language. It's a process that we go through. And if you stay still and not talk until it comes to you one day, boom, and you're so fluent, it just doesn't work. You have to try and make mistakes and get better at it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the myths that I hear a lot online is that people say, oh, well, you can't learn languages as an adult, you have to be a child to learn languages. And I think the difference is that a child does not care if it makes mistakes. And I'm talking about older children as well, up to 15 or something. I'm not quite sure when we start to take ourselves seriously and we're like, oh, I shouldn't make mistakes. But there's definitely a cutoff point where you just a child who doesn't care, you just shout whatever you think. And then you get into adulthood, and it's like everything you say, you think, is that really right? And then you end up saying nothing. And
so in psychology, it says that at around age 6, your consciousness comes into play. So as a child, you're always working on, like, anything that comes to your mind, you say. And you don't know this is what you shouldn't say and this is what you should say. And there's nothing called embarrassment. There's no such thing. It's not in their vocabulary. So they're always working out of their subconscious. It's always like, just everything comes out. But around age 6, they start to feel more conscious about themselves and people around them. And so then comes all these things that come into play, like I shouldn't say this or people are going to laugh at me, and all that comes into play. And it gets worse when you hit teenage years, because then you become really self-aware of what people are going to think. And then there's I always love to encourage people to get their kids at an early age exposed to so many different languages, the younger the better, which is fantastic. At an age when they hit puberty, the tongue, the research shows that like the tongue gets maybe bit heavier, that they're not able to pronounce as much, different words or in the intonations in the words. So it becomes more difficult. So the younger they are, the better for languages. First, they're not inhibited by all these other factors coming into play because they're at a very young age. So I love to do that. I love to push people to let their kids learn languages at a very young age. And you see that with parents that are from different cultures and different languages. If their mother is Italian, the father is French, and they're learning it in English school. So they'll hear French, Italian at home, and English in school, and they'll pick up all these different three languages as a mixture altogether.
Right.
So, and then they become maybe not proficient in all these languages, but they're always usually one language is more than the other. And maybe the academic one that they're taking in school would be more, but they still understand the French and the Italian that is being spoken. So the younger they're exposed to it, they don't care if they make those mistakes and they get corrected. But the older they get, it becomes very hard. And then it would be, no, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to speak this language because I'm not good at it, or I'm going to make mistakes and people are going to laugh at me while doing it.
So we should really, to become better language learners, we should just really try and adapt that child mind and get rid of the embarrassment, because it's like the old saying, isn't it? Why do we fall? To learn how to get back up. It's,
back up again. Yeah. And if you have that mentality that, listen, I'm going to make mistakes, but so what? My objective is to learn the new language. So as long as I'm reaching that objective, I don't care. So if you have that mentality, you'll be a great language learner. Because just keep that in mind. Keep a blank slate. It's okay. I'm going to make mistakes. That's fine. As long as I reach my objective. My objective is learning the new language. So what if I make mistakes during the way? I have to.
Yeah,
it's a natural thing. It's the process.
And I think it's simply just a volume question at the end of the day, because if you're too afraid of making a mistake, you're simply not producing the language enough in the various forms. And if you're not producing enough, you don't have enough input, or, well, I guess it's technically output. You don't have enough mass to actually form that language within. I mean, you can still learn a language without speaking too much, but it won't be very good compared to if you make a lot of mistakes, because that's how you adapt in your mind. You say something wrong, then you get corrected, and then you're like, oh, okay, that makes more sense, and that's how you get it. But it's so hard to do, isn't it?
It is. It's very hard, but if you just keep an open mind, that's all I could say. Keep an open mind, because that is the only way, and you have to realize that this is the only way. So I'm and then if you don't practice that language, you just lose it. Like I lived in, my father was a diplomat, so we were traveling a lot all over the world. So we were in Pakistan. He knows Urdu. I don't. I never stayed that long to learn it. We were in France for a year. I picked up some of that language, but I completely lost it because I never practiced it.
Right.
So I can pronounce it. I love my tongue is already situated that I can actually pronounce the words, but I wouldn't understand what they are or can't remember what they are because it was as a teenager I was there. So I can't remember it, but I'm sure if I kept, if I lived maybe there for a while or went there, I would pick it up again. But I'm now, since I know what's the pitfalls that I've gone through when I lost these languages, I try now because of Turkish, and I'm really serious, I want to keep that language. And so I now do, while I'm going to Saudi, or if I have talks going through the Middle East, I always stop by Turkey for a day or two just to go around into the bazaar and all these people and try to speak the language. And I know I'm massacring it, but it's funny how to see people react and they look at me and they laugh and I'm like, hey, it's okay, So how do you say this? So, and then they would tell me, no, you wouldn't say this, you would say that. I was like, oh, okay. So, and they appreciated that I'm learning their language. So they're very helpful. And so, and for me, it's fun because you know what, I'm not there for people to judge me if I'm doing it right or wrong. I'm there for the sake of learning,
Right.
plus enjoying myself. And so that's the whole part. So I'm trying to take any excuse to pass by Turkey just to learn, practice the language because I got nobody around me that speaks Turkish. So, I'm fortunate enough that it's on my way home. Plus, I have a lot of work with the university there, and I give lots of talks. So yearly, in conferences, I give talks there. So it's one of the best things that I think the language I chose was really good because of the location, as well as my research. They're very interested in the Turks are very interested in the languages and anxiety, and so I've always been offered to come and give talks at their universities there and conferences. So that was a blessing. But it's and I always enjoy myself, and they laugh and I laugh with them. So we're laughing with each other, not at each other.
Right. Like the team effort in the classroom.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're very, very nice, and they're very helpful, and it's because the whole thing is that you're showing the other person in front of you that I'm learning your language. I'm taking that time and effort to learn your language, so they always automatically become very helpful. They want to help you.
Right.
So that comes as a team effort, like you said. I mean, I would love to stay there for a while in order to get, because at the time you come there, you start beginning to become fluent in it. And then by the time you leave, you're more fluent in it. Then you leave the country and they're like, oh, all over again, I have to stop that language and revert to a new language,
right.
Which could be either Arabic or English back again. But it's, the best way would be, yes, to stay for a month or two and to be fluent and, to go there and, go shopping, go food shopping or whatever, talk to people, go into the market and just randomly talk about a lot of other things that normally, you wouldn't do it in a regular classroom. That would be the ideal way.
Right. And if everything fails, you always have the soaps, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's to maintain it. Excuse me. That's for maintaining it. That's in between. So, but remember, because you still have to keep hearing the language. Your ears has to get used to the language, the intonation, the words. You got to keep that. As long as your ears keep hearing it, you're starting to, because you're programming your mind. But you're not doing it literally, like putting codes in. But all the things that you hear are being programmed into your mind. So when you hear it later on, it's like, oh, I know what that means. It just comes out. And I tell you a very funny story, and it just sticks in my head now. As I was in Saudi, and I was in a market, and out of the blues, somebody, we were in a very tight place that a woman just pushed me, accidentally. And I accidentally as well pushed somebody else because it was like a ripple effect. And there was a little girl there, and she, and I call it luck. They were Turkish, the girl and the mother, they were Turkish. So I didn't fall, but I just pushed them because I was pushed. And so she started speaking in Turkish, and she was so upset. And she looked at me, and she was like talking in Turkish and she was fluent. She was in Saudi, so I would assume Arabic, but she was talking in Turkish. And all of a sudden, I blurted it out in Turkish. I'm so sorry, pardon me. And the girl was so amazed, and so she stopped talking because she knew she was in Saudi, that nobody's going to speak Turkish. All of a sudden, I looked like I was covered in everything, that I was like looking Saudi, and then all of a sudden I was speaking to her in Turkish. She was shocked. And the mother was looking at me. They all like had a silent moment, and they all looked at me, and I looked, and I was like shocked, like, how did that come out? My initial response was should have been in Arabic coming out, but Turkish just came out, and without me thinking. And so I thought, wow, this is all programmed into my head. And that was at the beginning. It was in my early stage of learning Turkish. So I didn't even know I had it in me to even answer back and excuse myself and say it wasn't my fault. But it was funny that it happened. That was unexpected. To me, it was like, wow, where did that come from? But I knew that as long as I was hearing the language and I was processing it, it was in my subconscious being programmed there. And when I needed it, it would come out.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I would say when I needed it.
And that reaction is basically, I mean, what a lot of language learners live for, that amazement or shock that when you hear your own language in a setting you definitely did not expect it. That's
exactly, yeah.
It's great.
And it's until this day I keep thinking, like, how did that come out? It just amazes me that how much my brain was processing, and it was in the back of my head, and when I needed it, it just came out.
Right.
So don't think that, oh, I don't know. A lot of people say, oh, I don't know a lot about this language, but you'd be amazed when it's time for them to use it. It just comes out, and you keep thinking, like, I didn't even know I even knew this.
Right.
But it's there programmed. It's sort of like, have you ever heard of like the super, I don't know what they call it, but we know when something happened, as an accident happened, and you see the mother doing a heroic thing and lifting a car because her son or somebody was underneath it. And how can a woman actually lift the car? But it was a time that this emergency, that this happened. Your whole system goes into shock, and you do something that out of normal you wouldn't even think about doing,
right.
Or you don't even think that you had the strength to do. I'm not saying this is exactly the same as this, but it's coming from that unexpected, in the moment, something that you revert to and go to without knowing that you even had that energy or that capability.
Right, because if the situation had been a lot less stressful, if you had just simply walked next to them and realized they were Turkish, you probably would not have even talked to them, because it's, first of all, how do you open a conversation in that tight area anyway? But what are you supposed to say? So, and then the anxiety comes in. Oh my God, am I going to say it right?
How am I going to say it? Exactly.
What am I going to say?
But it just came out because of the girl. I think she was 10 years old, and she was screaming at me. She was like, watch it. What are you doing? And she was talking in Turkish, and then I started answering back like I couldn't even think about it. It just came out.
Yeah.
But I shocked that girl and the mother. Like, they were like, "What? You speak Turkish?" So that was a highlight. I still remember her face in my head, that how she was so surprised that I answered back in Turkish.
Well, yeah.
It was unexpected.
Yeah,
but it's like these kind of things. So when I gave this example as showing that you are processing more than what you think you are, but it's just sitting there.
Yeah,
for you to recall it at one point at a time.
It's unconscious memory, isn't it? It's
exactly.
It's just there in the long-term memory, and if it comes up in a stressful situation, or in a point where you ignore your rational part of the brain, you just go straight to that unconscious mind.
Yes, you hit it on the nail. Exactly.
Because if you get time to think about it too much, then you get hesitation.
You're gonna get a whole conversation in your head that the whole situation goes, and you're still thinking about it.
Right.
And it's not gonna happen. Yes.
And then they're gone. You're like, oh.
Exactly. I even talk about, in my book, I talk about situations that when I was called upon to answer drill questions, like, how are you? What are you doing? How is everything? And so I would practice it going to class. I would sit in my car, and I'm thinking all of this, what question she's going to ask me, the teacher, and what am I going to answer? How am I going to answer it? Oh, and I'm going to impress her, and how am I going to say it? And I'm going to try to have longer sentences in order to make it, to show that I've gained this language, and how am I going to impress her or the classroom. And then when time comes in the class, when she asks me that question, I would one word would be the answer.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking in my head, but I rehearsed it. I've done all this rehearsal. I know what to say.
Right.
But it comes that I'm all of a sudden under the microscope. Everybody's looking at me and they're waiting for me to answer, that I just don't, I just give the shortest answer, whatever it is, so I can finish my turn and let's move on to the next person.
And sometimes the mind goes completely blank as well. It's
exactly.
You can't remember anything of the language.
Exactly. And then you think the simplest words don't mean anything to you, and you think, I've used this word 1,000,001 times. Why can't I remember what it is? And well, that happens, so that's normal. But the more usage of the language, the more fluent you become, the more easier it becomes. And so, now my objective is to maybe actually go and spend a month maybe in Turkey and try to get more fluent in the language. And so I don't want to lose it, because I'm not using it now, but I really need to continue on to be more fluent in it.
Yeah, I think it's a nice country too. I was there 2 times on holiday, and just only positive things about the people, and the weather's obviously fantastic, and good food. I like that.
Yeah, the food is fantastic.
Yeah. So definitely recommend it to anyone out there who hasn't visited Turkey yet. It's a great country, and the people there are just fantastic.
It's like a plug-in for Turkey.
Yeah, why not?
But I also talk about in the book about the economy and how Turkey was always on the map. It was always there. I mean, but now it's being now talked about even more as tourism, and I talk about how the soap opera had a very big hand in that, especially in the Middle East, and how they market it. So they're very smart in marketing that. And if you read the book, you'll understand what I mean by that. But it's, I've always, long time ago, I think a lot of people were going to Turkey, but not as much as now. And so what has changed? What has, why is it like that? Especially if you're not aware, the Middle East, going to Turkey, everybody, like a weekend, they would also go to Turkey. It's so popular now. It's just unbelievable.
Right.
And it's all because of the media and how they played it. So they did it a very smart way, and how the media played around with advertising Turkey, the areas, the cities, the tourism. I mean, it was just fantastic. And I talk about that in the book, how the change was.
Amazing. And we have the obviously also the cultural differences that I talked about before.
Yes.
I really enjoyed those as well, to get an insight into the Arabic world a little bit, because it is very much controlled by the media. What we Westerners actually get
what you
to know.
see, exactly. And especially it's also like in Saudi Arabia, like the media is always like going back, talking a lot of bad things about Saudi Arabia. And I'm not here to say that this is like it's all dandy there. No, we are changing. But change takes time, and people, when they compare Saudi with the West, they just compare that, they think that we are a very old country, but in reality we're a very young country that has gone so far in so little time. We're only 83 years old country. And, to come to be this far, that is just a big accomplishment. But the media never touches on that. It always says, oh, there's still, old Bedouins that don't know this or don't know, or they can't do this, or this is what's in their culture. They forget that we're just competing. Yes, we're competing with the rest of the world, but we're only a very young country. We're only 83 years old. So it's and I say in the book that we have companies in the U.S. or in the U.K. Lloyd's Bank is it's that bank is older than in Saudi Arabia formed. So I mean you can't compare. There's no comparison whatsoever. But I have to say we've gone a long way. We've come a long way since the development of the country and how it is. And we're still growing, and it's still continuing to grow.
Of course, and you constantly hear about new developments with women's rights, and because that's an
Exactly.
issue that has been a lot in the media. They're like, oh yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
women's got
Yeah,
more rights.
that has. But we still like women were allowed to vote in the US. I think it was only in the 19 I'm not sure 20s if I'm not mistaken. That was when they were allowed to vote, I think.
Right.
I'm not sure. The dates are confusing now.
Sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, and so we're talking about just the 1920s. This is something that we weren't even formed as a country in the 1920s.
Right.
And so and then they're like, oh, women don't do this, they can't do that. Yeah, we're changing, we are, but we're not that old that we have this history. The first war we ever gone with into was the Gulf War. That was in 1990. That was our first ever. I mean, so and that was it. So we didn't participate in World War I or II, or we didn't have all this history.
Right.
So we are a very young country. We are changing. I mean, change. It's very difficult to change very quickly because what you're going up against is a lot of culture and ways of life and how everybody was used to doing something, and now you're telling them to change it completely and to be more of a Western way. And so change is very, very difficult. People love to they love to be in their comfort zone. They don't want to change.
Right.
And when you're forcing them to change, it creates anxiety, it creates instability. I'm not saying that this change is good or this change is bad. It's all about that culture. You can't just change something just because to please others. It's that culture has to be accepting that change in order to go ahead and do it. And so we need a lot of education to educate people, to make them understand what entails with the change. It's very difficult, but
Yeah.
it's getting there. I mean, I see the difference all the time. I'm always back and forth. I work between Saudi, London, and the U.S. And so I'm always there, and I see the change every time. Every 6 months, I see a lot of changes going on. So there's massive changes in structured in laws and rules and regulations, which I'm very happy with.
Yeah, and it looks like, I guess the problem is that these positive changes are not often reported by the media because it's quite,
Exactly.
it's not interesting.
Of course, the media is not going to give you good things. Bad things sell, We know headlines, bad headlines, they're the one that sell.
Yeah.
Good headlines are like, oh, okay, so, who wants to know about that? Yeah, nobody wants to know that. But bad headings or things that happen that are bad, that's what sells newspaper. That's what sells or captures people's attention. Well, if you look at it like, abuse. Okay, yes. Women are being abused. Like, are you telling me in the U.S. there's nobody being abused?
Right.
Women are not being abused? But we don't see that. You don't have that headline as much as there. Plus the population we have there is only about I think with expats in the country about 20 million about, but only Saudis I think around 14 million. That's it. So even the population is very little compared to the U.S. Let's say, you have 250, almost 300 million. So it's minute. But yeah, and then plus you get the negative things like the fundamentalists and all that, and people are like thinking everybody in Saudi is a fundamental, but we're not.
Right, exactly.
These are just crazy people that which every other country has crazy people there.
Yeah.
So it's not only us, but we're getting the heavy, the negative media because that's what sells.
Exactly, and it's a shame, but
Yeah,
at least your book does a
unfortunately.
good job of telling some of the positive stories, like the literacy rate has gone up
Yeah.
tremendously, and more rights, and there are more females in the education system itself, which I suppose not too many years ago would have been quite a pipe dream, but now
Yes.
it's a reality. So as you say, change is happening slowly, but the problem for Westerners is just we don't hear about it because
Yeah, exactly.
so. But yeah. But anyway, it was great to to do it again. It's a shame we don't have the first one because I think we did cover some different angles, different topics, maybe slightly. So it's a shame we couldn't make a mega episode of the both ones. But again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and taking the time to redo the episode.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it so much for the second time. But I'm always available for you. So if anything comes up and you're interested in it, give me a call back.
Thank you so much. I'll take you up on that.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast.